A quick disclaimer, if you are not here because of the DevOps Academy course, please check the description below so you can understand or participate together. The DevOps Academy is an amazing initiative and it's all open source and free. I'm Daniel and I'm going to walk you through the second lab of the first class. Let's jump straight into it. Let's open the DevOps Academy site and find the exercise. So this exercise is to create an S3 bucket. We're going to do that via the CLI. And then we're going to upload a file into this S3 bucket. I'm going to explain a little bit about the S3 bucket very soon. Then we are going to access that S3 bucket via one of those instances that we created in the last exercise. You can probably follow the video if you haven't checked that yet. I have a walkthrough for that one. After that, we are going to create the PR, the pull request, with the answers of our exercise. So before implementing that solution, let's just talk a little bit about the S3 bucket. And we are going to do this exercise via the console, via the website, just so we can have an idea of what we want to achieve here. Let's head to S3. If you don't have it easy, you just look for S3 and you're going to find it here. S3 is the simple storage service from AWS, and all it does is store objects or files inside buckets. It's simple because there isn't much that you can actually do with those files. You can create, you can delete, and you can download. You can upload, download, and delete files from there. So if you want to rename, on the back, behind the scenes, it's copying the file with a new name and deleting the old one. If you want to edit a file, you're probably going to be downloading that file, making the changes, and then deleting the old one and pushing a new one on top of that, or just overwriting with a new one. So that's why it's simple. There isn't much more that you need to know right now about it. There are lots of services and things that you can be doing with that, but with that information is enough to understand what this exercise is about. So this exercise, we're going to create an S3 bucket via the CLI, but first, as I said, we are going to create that on the console. You got here into your S3 list of buckets, and you're going to create a bucket. Now, the bucket has a DNS compliant name, which means that it can be used as part of the name of the URL, the host name that you can access your bucket, which means letters, you cannot use underscore. There are a few restrictions there. And the bucket has to be unique across all AWS. So I'm pretty sure if I just write test, this name is going to be taken by someone already. A good convention is to use your domain name if you have one, which might make it distinguished from other stuff, and you're going to avoid conflicts. There's no enforcement there. AWS is not going to actually check if the domain is yours, but it's just a convention to use. So I'm going to create mine here. I have the domain tiroperto.com, and I'm going to create my bucket like that. You have a few options that you might be interested in know, like versioning. It's going to save the old versions of your file. When you upload a new one, it's going to keep a log of the history of the versions that you had, and that's all configurable, how long you want to keep it, and you have a lot of options around there. You can even do stuff like moving it to S3 Glacier, which is a cheaper storage. It's cheaper to store stuff there, but at the cost that it's more expensive to actually retrieve, or it can have higher delays in retrieving information from there. Let's not get so much into those details. Another thing you can have, your S3 bucket can be publicly accessible via the internet, like you put a HTML file there or something that you want to allow people to download. They can just point their browsers to a special URL, the URL that you're going to get later, and they can just download those files. So you have to be very worried about that, because you could be leaking important information if you allow such thing to happen. So for starter, let's just block all public access on that bucket. So we are not going to use that feature. And let's go on and confirm. Great, our bucket is here. So let's go ahead and upload a file here. I have a beautiful viewing that I want to save in S3. I'm not going to worry about the permissions right now. I'll just leave all default. Let's keep it simple for now. And there we go. We have the file uploaded to our S3. Let's try to access these files, this information, from inside our EC2. So let's just connect to it. I have it here. That's the public IP. And there we go. So let's copy a file inside here. And we have a file now inside our EC2. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to download that X-Wing file, and I'm also trying to upload the TIE Bomber into the S3 bucket from inside this EC2 instance. One way I could achieve that is by putting my credentials here inside this EC2 and using the CLI that's going to have access to S3 anyway. But we probably don't want to do that. We don't want to have my credentials here. We want to allow the EC2 as a machine to access the S3 bucket. So we're not going to allow one user, like my user inside this machine, to access the S3 bucket. What we are going to do is create a role which is going to allow this instance of the EC2 to access that specific bucket. I'm going to talk a little bit about the permissions later on, but that's the idea of the exercise. To IAM, so we can create the role. We're going to create a role inside. We are going to trust an AWS service. We could trust other entities, but we are going to trust a service. Actually, we're going to trust the EC2. It's one of the most common cases. And now we're going to create this role. We have to say what permissions whoever assumes this role can do. So we don't have a policy for that, so let's create one. And here is one important part of this exercise. What do you want to allow the EC2 instance to do in AWS? So what do you want them to access? We want them to access our S3. And what can that EC2 do in our S3? You could allow everything and then it would work. But that means that if someone hacks into that machine, they could basically access, list, delete, and do whatever they want to do with any of the S3 that I have in my account, which could be, that's a very bad security approach. So what we are going to do, we are going to specify exactly what it can do to our S3. So one of the things it can do is list the files inside that bucket. I'm going to allow that EC2 to see which files we have in the bucket. To be fair, that wasn't even really necessary as we know the name of the files, but let's be open-minded that it potentially could have a script or something that doesn't know the names of the files and need to do something different. Of course, it depends a lot on the use case. We have another one which is list all my buckets. If you click this one, you are allowing the EC2 to list the name of all the buckets that you have in your account. It's not going to grant access to them, but even knowing that they exist is something that I don't want them to know. There is no point, there is no need for that exercise to know all the name of the buckets that I have. So, but listing the contents of my bucket, I'm going to allow. I'm also going to allow it to get objects. I'm going to allow it to download the files from there. There are other things that I could allow here in the read-only access, but that's for now, that's all we need. And I'm also going to allow it to put objects, to upload files into the S3. And I think that's all we need: to list, to put, to get. And I'm not marking delete. In this case, my use case here is that the EC2 does not need to delete files from the bucket, so I'm not going to allow it to do. That's just I'm just pretending, like considering that it doesn't need that permission. And now that's the next step, which is very important as well, which means, okay, now that EC2 is going to have access to my S3, and inside my S3 it can list buckets, it can list the contents, it can get an object, and it can put an object there. Now, which S3s I'm talking about? If I click on any here, that means that EC2 is going to have access to any of my other S3 accounts. I have, for example, S3 resources. I have a bucket here, for example, that deals with some mail stuff, and I don't think I wanted someone hacking into that if they potentially got access to that EC2 instance. So we have to be more specific. So here it's asking a bucket, and here it's asking an object. Let's go with both of them. First one is asking the bucket name. The bucket name is this one. Now the next one is asking for an object, not a bucket name specifically, not a bucket. Why? Because the bucket, the first permission is going to be used to list the contents of a bucket. I'm not going to specify which files, which objects inside the bucket I can list. I'm going to specify that I can list this bucket. I can show what's inside this bucket. Now, to get and put objects, I can be even more specific. I can not only I'm going to say what's the name of the bucket, but I'm also going to say which files it can manipulate. I could put here xwing PNG, for example, so it's only going to allow us to access this file. But in this case, I think it's safe enough to say any file inside that bucket. After all, this bucket is created only for this specific purpose. And in my use case here, our application could need to create more files as needed. So I think that's good. Let's review that policy. And let's create. Now that we created that policy, let's find it here. Okay, so now we're attaching that policy that we just created to that role. What's the name of the role? EC2 S3 test access. There we go. We have our role has been created. What we want to do inside the EC2, I'm going to do that from my computer here because I know that here it's going to work. So let's just get out of the EC2 and I'm going to be trying to access that that S3. First thing I want to do is use the command AWS S3 to list a bucket, or I can even list the buckets by doing that. I have the permission, this user has the permission, but I want to list that bucket there. And as we know, we have that file inside, actually bwing.jpg. Now, what I want to do now is I want to copy a file that's in my downloads folder inside the S3. And I'm going to copy that file inside my S3. And there you go, it's there. You can refresh here, and you're going to see that the tie bomber has been uploaded. But I don't want to leave it there. I want to delete it. And that file has been deleted. And I'll just show I don't have anything there. I have the tie bomber, but I want to copy back my bwing to my downloads. And there's probably a typo there. AWS S3 copy from S3 to my downloads. And as you can see, it's going to be there. That's the bwing, and that's the tie bomber. So let's do that inside our EC2. Of course, you're forgetting some stuff, but let's just pretend we forgot stuff. So AWS S3 LS, and we don't have credentials, so we can't list which ones we have. Okay, and it's not only because we didn't grant permission to do that. We didn't grant permission to list the buckets we have in that machine. The problem we have is that we don't have credentials. We don't have a way to access that. So that's the instance that we are running, and we want to put a role, allow this instance to assume that role. And this is the role that we created, and we are going to apply. So if everything is working right, we should be able to do that. And there it is, it's working. So let's try now to do what I wanted to do before. Let's list all the buckets we have. And there you go. It's not allowing me to do that because I did not allow the list buckets operation. Okay, so let's now copy the tie bomber that we have here into the S3 bucket. And the command's exactly the same as before because we already tried that. The only difference is it's not in our uploads, it's just here. A little bit of typos, but it's there. It has been uploaded. You can see the tie bomber now is there. What about downloading the other file? That's almost the same, just the other way around. So the name of the other file is bwing.jpg, and we're going to copy it to the current folder. And it's here, downloaded. So let's try to delete it now. Let's try to delete the viewing. You remember we did not grant access, but now we realize that we need access to that. So in some way I already knew which permissions I had to give, but most of the time, like many times, especially if you're beginning with policies, you're not going to know exactly what permissions you need to grant. So here you go, a very good hint on what you need to do. Delete failed, this object, an error occurred, access denied. So there's an error, access denied, when calling the delete object operation. Okay, so let's go there to our policy. And let's edit that policy. We realize that actually we need the delete object. Okay, the resources you're not changing. It's still we can still delete any object inside that bucket. And let's save. And there you go. It's going to delete. It failed. Let's just wait a little bit. Takes a little bit of time to refresh. And now it's deleted. We did all that by the console, and the exercise is about doing that by the CLI. We need to know how we can run all these things from the CLI, because we may want to automate. It's very rare that we're actually going to be doing anything that you want to construct via the console, because you want to be able to reproduce what you did, allow other people to test, and all this kind of stuff. Usually you're in the console trying to debug something that's not working very well, or trying to learn how a tool works. Before you want to learn how to do that in the console before you can go to the terminal and to the CLI. So the steps now are going to be a little bit of research. We're going to find the documentation on AWS. You can just Google for it, how to create a role, how to create a policy, and then you are going to find what are the commands on the CLI. So let's get out of the machine. That machine is not going to have access to create everything that we need. And I'm going also to delete and revoke all the permissions we made via the console, so we can start overdoing that via CLI. We know what we need to do beyond that by the console. So now let's have a look exactly what the exercise requires to do. Let's check our requirements so we don't end up doing a little bit more, because on this, when I was doing the console, I did a little bit more just to show how it works. So the exercise here has the answer files, and it says that the first thing you need to provide are the commands to create the bucket and copy a file. Okay, that's easy. Then the commands that we need to run so the instance can access the files in the S3. Basically, you have to create the role with the policy and then attach that to the instance. And after that, we have to put the commands that we use to copy a file, the file from the S3, inside the instance. So all we need to do here, my understanding, is we have to read a single file. In our case, it's going to be the viewing.jpg. We are not listing the files inside there. We are not saving a file there. We are not deleting. We could even restrict that policy to be only for that single specific file. That would be the least permissive solution, but that's still going to make it work. And then in the end, have a little bit about the challenge. We can get to that later. So let's get started here, just getting the repository ready. Like, I'll check out my branch and get the answers file ready as a README, so we can start filling it up later as we do the exercise. Using a terminal, it might be easier just checking the help instead of opening a browser and Googling or finding the AWS reference documentation. After all, if you have a terminal, it's probably all the information is probably there already. Don't be afraid to find some examples online. There is nothing wrong with copy and paste as long as you understand what the commands are doing. At least that's an excuse that I use all the time. So we are going to open our terminal. Let's open two terminals, make our life easier, and let's get started. One of the things we have to do is understand that we use a lot of this command here, which is the AWS S3, and that's the command that we interact with the bucket. We copy, I'll show you this, we copy, we list buckets, we move, we interact with the bucket and the contents itself. But there is another command, which is the S3 API command. That's the one that we use to create a bucket and manage the bucket itself. So for most of what we're going to do right now, to create the bucket and block the access, the public access, that's what we are going to be doing. I'll guide you in the beginning, I'll guide you like I would do if I don't know what the command is, because I never remember them anyway. I want to find how to create a bucket. So I'm pretty sure the help of the S3 API is going to give me something if I search for that. And there you go. I'm very confident that the command is going to be the command create bucket. How can we do that? We have here an example of how to create a bucket. And then let's try this one. First, I need to activate my AWS profile because I don't have it active by default. Okay, so now let's create the bucket that we want to use. I'm going to call it and now that's not going to work because there's something a little bit silly about AWS, that if you don't use the US East 1 region, you have to use a constraint. You have to constrain the location to the location that you're using. They probably have a good reason why they do that, probably something to do with legacy, but I don't know what the reason is. But it's written in the help. That's how you create the bucket. And I think you're going to find something that we didn't expect. Look, the objects here can be public, and we don't want that. When you created that via the console, we were asked if you wanted to block public access or not. But when you created that via the CLI, it just allows you to have the public access. So what you want to do here, you want to go there and save that setting, but we don't want to do that via the console, of course. How to do that via the CLI? Well, I have no clue, so let's have a look. We have to do AWS S3 API. That's probably the command there. And let's check, maybe it's something to do with block or something to do with public. And we found put public access block. That sounds like what we need. And if you read the instructions, that's exactly, like if you read the help, that's exactly what we needed. The syntax is a little bit annoying because we have to set one by one. So, but that's what needs to be done. I'll just copy and paste that one. The bucket name. And we have to set that to block everything, exactly like in this example. And that's what we needed. We can just confirm that via the console. And there you go. The bucket and the objects are not public anymore. The last thing we need to do is to copy that file into the bucket. Now the file has been uploaded. We can open here and the file is there. My idea was to have the help and all the stuff going in one terminal so I could have a clean command and output on the other one so I could copy and paste for the solution. But I forgot to do that, so now I'm going to just fast forward a little bit while I copy everything from my buffer into the answers. We are going to cheat a little bit here because nobody needs to remember the exact syntax of the role if it's very easy to get it from there. What we are going to do, we are going to create, start the creation of the policy with the parameters we want and copy the JSON from here. So what's the policy that we need? We need the S3. We want the actions. If you remember before, we had to list the bucket, to put an object, and to get an object. But now in this exercise, the only thing we need is to actually get an object to read from the S3. So that's all we need. Now the resources, again, we are not going to allow getting objects from any bucket. We are going to make sure that we get only from this specific bucket that we have here. And we are even going to enforce a little bit more than that. We're going to enforce that we can only get this particular file from the bucket. Before here, we had any, which should be fine. It allows you to get any file from this bucket, but we can restrict even further by allowing only getting the bwing.jpg. Okay, so now that we have this, we can come here to JSON and copy that JSON file. We don't have to save the policy. I just wanted to grab this code here, and then we can save that inside our a file that we are going to call it policy.json. That's on Mac. That's a command to paste the contents of your clipboard, and I'm going to redirect to a file. You can see that the policy is there. Now, if we want to hide a little bit that we use this trick, we can remove this here. That's a way so people don't know that we just trick and copy that from the console. Now we are going to do the same thing, but for a role. For the role, you're going to have to create one just so we can get the information from it. You can probably it's easier to just find in the examples on the AWS documentation. You're going to have the example of exactly what we want to do, but I'm going to show how can we copy that from the console. Let's say that we created something via the console and we want to know exactly how it was created. So let's create the role like before. I'm going to get an EC2. Now the permissions, I'm not going to select anything because right now I don't care which permissions, I only want the role. Let's review, give it any name, which doesn't matter right now. And then here is our test. Go to trust relationships because that's what we need. And when you edit, you can get the JSON that creates that trust, that creates that role. So I can cancel that. I copy that JSON. I'm deleting that role because I don't need it. And I'm going to paste that inside our role trust JSON. You can see that's how it looks like. So now you know how to find the information using the help, so I won't be walking through that anymore. I will just pretend that I know all the commands by heart, and I'm going to explain what I'm doing while I'm just copying them from my secondary screen. So what we're going to do now is create the role that we need to create. So we're going to use the AWS IAM to create a role. We're going to give it a name, and we need to give which document, which policy it's going to be using for the trust. And that's the one that we just made here. Valid JSON, I just copy and paste, so I'm pretty sure it's correct. What I think I did wrong is that I have to put this prefix. Okay, so the role has been created. Now we have to create the policy that's going to be connected to that role. And then after creating the policy, we attach the policy to the role. However, there is a command in AWS CLI that can do both at the same time. So AWS and our role should have been created. Although if I don't see the output, I might want to double check that. Sometimes we have success, a silent success, which means it's only going to fail, show a message if there's an error. It's easy to check, and it's here. There is one small difference here when you're not doing it that via the console, because when you create an instance with a role via the console, it creates something called an instance profile, which has the settings of how should an instance be started. If there's a document saying that, and it explains here that instance profiles are created automatically when you create them via the console, but they are not created via the CLI. So if you're looking in the help, you're going to see that everything pushes you toward that instance profile because you need to create that. Let's create one because it's needed. Now we have an instance profile. We have to connect the role that we created with that instance profile. Because as I said before, we cannot connect the role directly to the instance. You have to create an instance profile that can be associated with one or more instances. Okay, now we have that profile created, and the role is associated with the profile. So the last thing we have here to do is to find our instance, and then we can apply that profile to this instance that it's already running. I'll just see if I can find it from here. That's my instance. We can associate that instance that we have with the profile. You can see that the state is associating, but it usually runs very fast and it should be ready by now. Let me just copy all these answers to the file. Missing now is just testing, so let's get inside that EC2 and let's try to copy that file here, and we could download it. Now, because of our permissions, we should not be able to do anything else there. It should be access denied. Access denied, or even an ls. That's exactly what we expected. What to do is just fill the responses, the README markdown, so we can make a pull request back into the repository. And that's all.